Spider-Man has always been somewhat of a paragon within the Marvel Universe at large. It's true that he might not have the Boy Scout reputation of someone like Captain America, nor the fearless leader status that heroes like Luke Cage and Carol Danvers are famous for. But in his own sarcastic way, Spider-Man has always been one of the most stand-up, trustworthy superheroes in the Marvel pantheon. Over the years, Peter Parker's honesty and dedication to helping others has earned him the respect of some of the most intimidating and hard-boiled heroes on this planet and beyond. Wolverine, Daredevil, and even the Silver Surfer are just a few of the names on the long list of those that Spidey can call his friends and allies. But despite his stellar references, Peter is anything but perfect. We all err from time to time, but when you spend your days web-slinging around New York saving innocent civilians from supervillains, a small mistake could be the difference between life and death. Today here at Plot Armor Comics, we're going to travel back through Spider-Man's storied history and count down the 10 worst decisions the Wallcrawler ever made. Get your tissues ready, folks, because when you're Peter Parker, blunders almost always end in tragedy. 10. Affair with Betty Brant. Rarely, if ever, are things in Peter Parker's life going smoothly. If his web-slinging work is going well, you can be sure his love life is in shambles, and vice versa. But perhaps no moment quite threw Peter for more of a loop than when his old flame Betty Brant arrived at his apartment unannounced and made herself comfortable. You see, dear viewer, Betty and Peter go way back. All the way back, in fact. As J. Jonah Jameson's secretary, Betty was the young Peter Parker's first ever love interest while he worked as an amateur photographer for the Daily Bugle. Though their flirtations would quickly cool after the arrivals of both Gwen Stacy and MJ into Peter's life. After Peter, Betty would later fall for fellow co-worker Ned Leeds, and the two would quickly find themselves happily engaged. But after the newlyweds moved to Paris, Betty found herself increasingly isolated in a strange new country. "We were just married, and I was more alone than when I was single," she bemoaned to Pete upon her return. "Finally, I couldn't take it any longer, so I decided to leave." And leave she did, without even so much as a word to her workaholic husband. Coincidentally, Betty arrived back in Peter's life immediately after his relationship with Mary Jane collapsed, with her having turned down his first marriage proposal. It didn't take long for Betty to make her intentions known, wanting to pick up where she and Peter left off. Even though Peter was initially resistant, eventually Betty wore him down and the two became ever so briefly involved. Aside from being just plain dubious, the kiss would earn Pete a well-deserved right hook to the face when Ned Leeds returned from Paris. And when Peter told Betty, "You were just convenient. You showed up when Mary Jane jilted me," his other cheek would be balanced out by a stiff slap for good measure. 9. Humiliated the Kingpin as revenge. Immediately following the first superhuman civil war, which will be making multiple appearances further down our list, Spider-Man's secret identity was public knowledge, and Peter Parker was one of the most famous men in America. This publicity, as he had always feared, made everyone close to him a target. A hit went out on Peter's head, and when a sniper narrowly missed his target, the bullet found purchase in someone else's torso, Aunt May's. This put Peter on one of the darkest paths of vengeance that his career had ever known. He even voluntarily went back to wearing his black suit design, once synonymous with Spidey's more violent chapters. After tracing the hit back to one Wilson Fisk, the currently imprisoned Kingpin of New York, there was nothing that could keep Peter from the man responsible for his aunt's injury. After giving copious amounts of his own blood to Aunt May in an attempt to keep her stable, Peter was lightheaded and woozy. Still, Pete headed straight for Rikers Island, where he knew the Kingpin was serving out his sentence. Sneaking into the jail without issue, Spider-Man met Fisk in the prison mess hall, where the two sized up to lay the beat down on each other. In front of the entire cell block, Spider-Man and Kingpin stared each other down. It was one of the few times that Spider-Man had nothing to say. No quips, no jokes. Just pure unbridled rage boiling up in his stomach as he watched Fisk drivel. "As arenas go," Fisk monologued, "at least this one comes with a very appreciative audience. Wouldn't you say, Mr. Parker?" Peter was barely listening at this point, but when Fisk said, "I guess you can't make an omelet without breaking a few old ladies," Spidey exploded into action. Frankly, Wilson didn't stand a chance. Most people don't understand just how much Peter Parker holds back when fighting unpowered individuals. This time, he didn't. He beat the Kingpin mercilessly, wordlessly, without quarter. At one point, Peter even threatened to fill Fisk's insides with webbing until he asphyxiated or suffocated, whichever came first. This beatdown might not have come with the consequences some other choices on this list carried, but it still represents an incredibly dark moment in Peter's life, and the choice to dole out violence simply for the sake of violence. A harrowing decision that there's no doubt Peter looks back on with regret. But before we see where else Peter's decision-making has spectacularly failed, be sure to subscribe to the channel with notifications on to never miss an upload, and smash that like button for some plot armor today. And get ready, folks, we ain't seen nothing yet. 8. Brought the Venom symbiote to Earth. While in recent years, the alien being known as Venom has become a tentative ally of Spidey's, and even grown to be a hero in his own right, there's no question that the symbiote's introduction to Earth initially led to a massive number of casualties. When you consider not only the decades that Venom spent as a murderous and insatiable cannibal, but the subsequent creation of Carnage and the body count his Crimson Twin racked up, it's almost unthinkable the number of lives one simple decision wrought. And yet, who else could be responsible for acting as a planetary taxi service for a psychopathic and violent alien parasite but Peter Benjamin Parker? Famously, during the 1984 Secret Wars event, Spidey was searching for a way to repair his ripped and tattered costume. After meandering around the gigantic alien base of operations, he fails to locate the costume creator, but manages to find another contraption. "Hey Hulk!" Peter yells as he explores the laboratory. "Which of these gizmos is it?" And then, "Oh, must be this one. It looks like it wants to make me a costume." Approaching the strange device, Peter tries to concentrate on the new suit he's hoping to be gifted. But instead of needle and thread, the machine produces a strange pitch-black orb that Peter doesn't quite know what to make of. What the heck is that? Peter wonders as he observes the strange material. And why is it making my spider sense tingle? Maybe I'd better get rid of... Hey! Suddenly, the black goo snakes up Peter's arms faster than he can react, and within seconds forms his famous, or infamous, black and white suit. This same suit that Peter would bring home with him when the Secret Wars concluded, and that would later bond with one Eddie Brock to become the horrifying Venom. Thus began the cycle of violence that would claim so many innocents along the way. How many lives would have been saved if Peter had simply listened to his spider sense from the beginning and never let the symbiote bond with him in the first place? The world will never know. But one thing's for sure, Peter sure blames himself for ever allowing Venom within 100 light years of his home planet. 7. Ignored his first crime. Perhaps the most fabled mistake Peter Parker ever made was letting a common thief run by him during his first public outing as Spider-Man. It all seemed so quaint at the time. Spidey had just enjoyed his first television showcase appearance, and Peter was still reeling from all the fame and money being flashed under his nose. As he walked out of the studio, a thief ran towards him, being chased by a policeman. Spider-Man took no action to stop the criminal in his escape, and was even flippant when asked why he'd sat back and relaxed instead of stepping in to help. "Sorry, pal," Peter told the officer. "That's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number one. That means me." Of course, we all know what happens next. Though, in the original comic, things play out a bit differently than on the screen. Originally, days later, the Parkers were told by police that Ben had been shot and killed by a thief after trying to impede his escape. While the neighbors look after poor Aunt May, the police tell Peter that they've cornered the killer in a warehouse at the edge of town. Peter, in a fit of rage and grief, dons his TV Spider-Man costume and tracks down the murderer to serve his own form of justice. When Spidey reaches the warehouse, he easily locates the killer. Frightening and cornering the man, Peter yells, "There's no place on Earth where you can hide from me. First, my web will relieve you of your gun. And then, my fists will do the rest." When Spidey pulls back the cap of the gunman, he's horrified to discover that it was the very same burglar that he had let escape without a care. Guilt-stricken, Peter webs up his very first common criminal and leaves him for the authorities. When he gets home, tears streaking down his face, Peter sobs, "My fault. All my fault." The decision to allow the thief to escape from that TV studio set in motion both the death of Uncle Ben and the creation of Spider-Man as we know him today. But though it was the first major mistake in Peter's life, it would by no means be the largest. 6. Downfall of Parker Industries. When Peter founded the illustrious Parker Industries, he felt like he was setting out to make the world a better place, to use his brain instead of his brawn for once, and try to help as many people as he could all at once rather than one at a time. A worthwhile venture, to be sure, but ultimately a doomed one. Partially because, well, it wasn't really Peter who founded the company. It was none other than Otto Octavius, during the time when Doc Ock had managed to take over Peter's body and was attempting to become the superior Spider-Man. Hey, wait a sec, we have a whole video on that. In any case, it would be the very man who started Parker Industries in Peter's name that would eventually bring it to the ground. When Doc Ock finally re-emerged in a bid to take over the company, things looked very bleak. "I shall unlock every secure file," Otto gleefully told Spidey. "Then your intellectual property, all your resources, will be mine, and you'll have nothing." Now, at this point, Parker Industries had been doing considerably well and was on the forefront of creating some of the most advanced technology on the planet. All of that tech landing in Octavius's hands would have been devastating not only for Peter, but for the world. And considering Doc Ock had aligned himself with Hydra during this time, it made his victory all the more dangerous. No one understood this quite like Peter, who zipped to his fancy high-rise office to give one final company-wide announcement. "Parker Industries Shanghai," Peter's voice boomed throughout the building. "This is it. I didn't want to have to make this call, but we're facing a hostile takeover. Literally. Tonight, he's knocking down the front door, but tomorrow, he could be sneaking in through the back. If he does, all the great work we've done here could be twisted into helping the worst people on Earth. We know what we have to do. It's been an honor to build up this company with you. Now, let's tear it down." While the decision to implode the company to save it from corruption was certainly not a mistake, the downfall of Parker Industries highlighted how much of an error the creation of the company was in the first place. Coming one step from disaster before slamming on the brakes is certainly no way to run a company. And although Peter didn't technically found the company himself, he certainly spearheaded the project when it landed in his lap. From top to bottom, Parker Industries was a mistake that ended the only way it was ever going to: inches from utter disaster. 5. Accidentally killed someone. When you have the proportional strength and speed of a spider, one pulled punch can be the difference between a bruise and a burial. But no one can be perfect. Even superheroes make mistakes from time to time. And if there's one punch Peter Parker wishes he'd never thrown, it would be this one. Spidey was in Russia, working alongside Wolverine to help the X-Men locate and save one of his old flames, a Cold War spy by the name of Charlemagne. But tracking down a master spy on the run is no easy feat. "Charlie's scared," Wolverine explained to Spidey. "She knows she's as good as dead. No government will protect her. She's got nowhere to run." It seemed as though Charlie had run afoul of some very powerful and very bad people. Said Wolverine, "Way back when, a core group of KGB agents hired her for a gig, and then tried to terminate her when the job was done. Charlie took that real personal. She's going around taking out all the agents in that old group. She wants her revenge before she herself gets killed." Wolverine and Spidey rarely saw eye to eye when it came to their methods, but eventually, after Charlie had dispatched all of her targets, she made herself known to Wolverine in a cemetery just out of town. As the former lovers embraced sadly, knowing their time was short, Wolverine thought to himself, "They'll kill Charlie slowly and painfully. Sooner or later, her luck will run out. She's facing the inevitable. That's where I come in. If she's got to die, she wants to die in my arms. If I loved her, I'd pull the plug now." But even as Wolverine stabs Charlie once, he finds her still alive, if only just. Before Logan could finish the job, however, Spidey arrived, webbing his claws away from Charlie at the very last second. "You're crazy!" Spidey yelled down. "You're absolutely nuts! You're killing your own girlfriend? What kind of maniac are you?" "Back off, kid," replied Logan threateningly. "This is too deep for you." With that, Spidey pounced on Wolverine to keep him from dispatching the injured girl. The two fought with ferocity and rage. Claws ripped through webs as hit after hit rang out against adamantium bones. Eventually, helicopters arrive, sending Wolverine scampering. But when Spider-Man's Spidey sense starts to flare up, he expects a surprise attack from behind. Peter whips around before seeing what he's aimed at. The full force of his fist connects with Charlie's face, sending the woman barreling to the ground. She dies quickly, bunched up in Wolverine's arms, succumbing to the brute force of Spidey's fist. Charlie committed suicide. Wolverine knows. She knew what she was doing. She knew how cocky Spider-Man was. She knew she shouldn't have gone anywhere near him. She was a pro. Not that any of it could ever make Peter feel any better, who would live the rest of his life regretting not looking before he leapt. 4. Killed Mary Jane. Spider-Man Reign is a particularly controversial addition to the Spider-Man legacy. Rain tells the story of a distant future in which an elderly, depressed, and embittered Peter Parker has given up his mask and web shooters, but is called once more to don his costume and be the hero he once was. Now, a lot happens in Rain that we won't have time to talk about here, but suffice to say, it's not the blue skies happily ever after we all know Peter deserves. No, this story gives us a gnarled, painful vision of Spidey's future, in which arguably the worst possible thing has happened to our hero. A tragedy so dark that it caused Peter to hang up the webs forever. When the decrepit corpse of Dr. Octopus returns from the grave, he knows just how to hit Peter where it hurts. Digging up and parading the dead body of Mary Jane around while he and Spidey battle, Peter can't help but be swept up in memories of the past. Her white dress, Peter reminisced as he watched MJ's body fly through the air, stained with dirt and time, like trampled lilies. I'm sorry, MJ. With that, Peter is transported back to one stormy night decades earlier, sitting beside a hospital bed with Mary Jane lying wordlessly beside him. My chest was too small for what you did to my heart, he remembers saying to her that night. I wanted to tell you so much, but words didn't have enough. So I tried to show you. But just when you meant the most, just when I thought I could do it, I screwed up. As Peter is wrested back to the present, we learn that Mary Jane had died of cancer. Cancer that the doctors and nurses were confused by, unsure of the origin. But Peter knew what made MJ sick. He did. Oh God, he sobs. I'm sorry. The doctors didn't understand how it happened. How you had been poisoned with radioactivity. How your body slowly became riddled with cancer. I did. I am filled with radioactive blood. Now, the events of Spider-Man Reign are far from widely accepted canon, so the idea that prolonged contact with Peter could somehow give someone cancer isn't officially based in lore. But if we do count Reign as part of Spider-Man's story, then it seems one of the most tragic and horrible things Spider-Man ever did was to get close to Mary Jane. Peter knew his second life as Spidey could put those closest to him in danger. He just didn't think that the danger would be from him. 3. The death of Gwen Stacy. While Uncle Ben's untimely demise served as the induction point for Peter to pick up crime fighting, it was the death of his first long-term girlfriend that gave Peter his first true heartbreak. The night Gwen Stacy died is an absolutely integral Spider-Man story that watches Peter go through one of the worst losses of all time and would stick with him forevermore. During the story, Peter is suffering from a cold that is affecting both his balance and his stamina. So when Norman Osborn's inner demon is reawoken and he once again dons his Green Goblin getup, Peter is already at a disadvantage. But when he arrives at his apartment to find the Goblin's calling card and his girlfriend snatched, Peter knows he has no choice but to move quickly. He tracks the Goblin to the George Washington Bridge, one of New York City's most famous landmarks. Atop the bridge, he sees Gobby gloating with an unconscious Gwen at his feet. "Spider-Man!" yells Green Goblin. "Or should I say, Mr. Parker?" Oh yeah, the Goblin knows Peter's secret identity even if Norman doesn't. "I have your woman up here, my friend. Your presence in this world has been a source of constant agony to me. I wish you to leave it. Permanently." Spidey, even through a foggy headache, battles his heart out, just barely ducking and dodging his way through the Goblin's arsenal of weapons. Finally, Peter sees his chance to lay the Goblin out and save Gwen. He winds up and hits Osborn with everything he's got, hoping to buy himself some time for a quick getaway. Unfortunately, Peter underestimates his opponent, and Osborn finds his feet faster than anticipated. My best bet is to pick up Gwen and run, Peter thinks as he rushes up the tower. But the Goblin's glider proves just as quick, and Osborn manages to bump Gwen off the side just before Peter can reach her. Moving on instinct as Gwen begins to fall, Spidey leans over the side and snaps his webs out at his first love. His shot catches Gwen's leg, but only just, and the whiplash from her downward momentum snaps her neck on impact. When Peter pulls Gwen back up, he sobs to himself when he realizes what has happened. "Don't be dead, Gwen. I don't want you to be dead. I saved you, honey. Don't you see? I saved you." There's not one mistake that led to the death of Gwen Stacy, but many small ones that added up to one tragic outcome. What if Peter had dove off the bridge himself to catch Gwen? What if he had turned around to finish the Goblin off while he had the advantage? Peter would endlessly pore over each of his decisions in those fateful seconds, wishing he had done things differently. But in the end, our actions have consequences we cannot predict. A bitter lesson Peter learned that horrible and tragic night, holding in his arms the body of his first love. 2. Unmasked Publicly. Of course, one of Peter's most famous blunders of all time would be televised nationwide to an audience of millions. Who could forget that fateful day that Peter decided once and for all to show the world who was under the mask? After years of being the most diligent protector of his secret identity, Peter threw all his hard work away one day during the midst of the first superhuman civil war. Having sided with Iron Man in the early days of the conflict, a huge mistake in its own right, Spidey was talked into unmasking for the very first time as a publicity stunt to make Iron Man's Superhuman Registration Act seem more palatable. It wasn't until it was too late that Peter realized he was being used as a prop in a grand political game. When he came out in front of the press, fully costumed, Spidey started his prepared speech. As most of you probably know, I've guarded my secret identity pretty carefully over the years. And it's only after a long talk with my wife and family that I've decided to take the following step. Now, it is important to note that Aunt May and Mary Jane were included in this decision, so Peter need not feel guilty for making anyone's choices for them. But the truth remains that the reason Peter revealed himself to the world was simply one move in a rollout plan designed by Tony Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D. to make their new legislation as popular and commercially viable as possible. On the podium, Peter went on to say, "I'm not wearing my old mask because I'm ashamed of what I do. I'm proud of who I am. And I'm here right now to prove it." With this, he lifted his mask over his head and showed the entire world who Spider-Man was. "My name is Peter Parker," he announced, "and I've been Spider-Man since I was 15 years old. Any questions?" As cameras popped and video rolled, Tony took Peter by the shoulder and said, "Soak it up, Peter. You're bigger than Elvis now." Now, almost immediately, Spidey realized that this decision was a massive mistake, certainly one of the largest in his career. Only 3 issues later, when Spider-Man left Iron Man's side to join Captain America's underground rebellion, Stark threatened him, saying, "Don't be a fool. You really think you could just go back to your old life now that everyone knows who you are? This isn't just about you anymore. What about May? What about Mary Jane?" This moment made crystal clear to Peter that not only was Iron Man interested in unmasking him for the good press, but also as leverage to make sure Spider-Man could never leave his side. "I'm disappointed in you, Peter," Stark said as he raised his blaster. "Not as disappointed as I am in myself," Peter replied as he made his escape. The decision to publicly unmask is one that fundamentally changed Peter's life forever and led to many mop-up storylines that fans and critics alike despised. One such storyline actually resulted in another of Peter's major mistakes. But this time, it wasn't just his anonymity that he gave away. It was something much more important. 1. Traded Mary Jane for Aunt May. In terms of Peter's least popular decisions, this one takes the cake. In fact, so reviled were the events of the One More Day storyline that, as it stands, most Spider-Man fans try their best to forget it ever happened. But this becomes incredibly hard when you consider the scope of the ramifications this single decision would have on Spider-Man's future. Honestly, as a diehard fan of Peter and MJ myself, even summarizing the decisions made during One More Day is agitating. But worry not, dear viewer, we'll get through this together. So, to recap, after Spidey unmasked himself to the world during Civil War, a bounty was put on his head by the Kingpin. As a result, Aunt May took a bullet meant for Peter and found herself in critical condition. A few days ago, she was smiling and talking, and Peter thinks to himself as he stands by her hospital bed with MJ. Then she was attacked. Because now everyone knows who I am, and Aunt May became a target of opportunity. It's my fault that she's lying there. My fault that she's dying. My fault. Peter tries everything under the sun to keep May from dying on that hospital bed. He runs to Iron Man and asks for money, even after quitting his side during the Civil War. Tony helps Peter, but money alone couldn't save May. Just buy her time. Peter asks for Doctor Strange's help in changing the past, hoping to stop the bullet before it even reaches her. This also proved ineffective. Eventually, having reached the very end of his web, Peter is approached in the street by a young red-headed girl who professes to have all the answers he's looking for. Confused and desperate for a solution, Peter follows her. "Come on," the girl says. "I don't have a lot of time. You have even less. And her? The one you're trying to save? She has no time at all. Reluctantly, Peter is swept up in this young child's confidence and vague promises. Eventually, the child's words begin to turn darker. You've already failed. Everyone's told you the same thing. Your aunt is going to die, and there's nothing you can do about it. But I can, she says as her form changes in a billow of red smoke and the smell of brimstone. Towering over Peter now is the dreaded, terrible form of Mephisto himself as he sneers.
I am the only one who can save her.
Enough of the games. You didn't want my soul, so what do you want? Peter eventually asks the dark demon.
I want that which gives you joy, that which sustains you in your moments of greatest despair.
Mephisto cackles.
I want your love. I want your marriage.
Well, you can guess what happens next, folks. Not only does Peter agree to trade his and Mary Jane's love over to the devil for the life of his aunt, he sacrifices things he didn't even have a chance to know yet. For instance, the young redhead Mephisto appeared as Peter and MJ's future daughter, Mayday Parker, aka the Spider-Girl, erased forever in the demonic trade Peter engaged in. Thus, Peter and MJ's relationship would be eternally damaged, never again able to return to the pure, true love they once shared. This undoubtedly represents the worst decision Peter Parker has ever made, and one whose price he will pay every day for the rest of his life. Thanks so much for joining us on this walk through Spider-Man's biggest screw-ups. We hope you enjoyed the video. On behalf of all of us here at Plot Armor Comics, we hope you have an amazing rest of your day.